Ging. I'm currently the head of two teams, actually, the head of operational development and compliance and the head of interconnection operations at Eirgrid. It's just an anomaly at the moment. One of my colleagues departed in a hurry, so I took over his team and I will be moving into that space. So I'm waiting for my replacement to take over my previous role in operations development and compliance. So my career to date has been kind of a strange one. I started out in UCD, did a PhD there in photonics and fiber optics, began lecturing in communication systems in the, I suppose, the electrical and electronic department back then in the late noughties. And in around the time of the financial crisis in 2008, I was beginning to look kind of for other opportunities and saw that Eirgrid were kind of starting to do things in a renewable space. So I wanted to get involved in that and joined Eirgrid, and I haven't looked back since. I've been in, I think, 5 or 6 different teams in Eirgrid, all doing different things. So from operational planning, system planning, network planning, and then into markets. And now I'm in asset management and commercials for an interconnector, so a physical link between Ireland and Wales. So it's an opportunity to pivot a lot in your career. But one of the things that I've been most passionate about is CPD, and as a result, I've been involved in hiring, recruitment, and particularly for the grads and interns that join Eirgrid Group. I'm involved in the internal panel that assesses them, but also I'm one of the managers who gets allocated some of those grads to work with them. So I'd say I've probably worked with about 15 to 20% of our graduate intake over the years, maybe slightly more, and have strong personal relationships with them. And I think that's kind of important, you know, as a manager, you kind of get to feel what people are interested in and what they want to work on, and giving them meaningful work to work with as well. So I'm delighted to be here today to kind of be part of this panel.
Thanks very much, John. Very interesting role, and great that we have you here today, as you are so, I suppose, in touch with graduates, and you can help us, I suppose, and give us some advice in relation to perhaps maybe applications and also the interviews for those graduate interviews. Thanks very much, John. Seyma, over to you.
Thank you. I am Seyma Dogan. I'm working with Arup with early careers recruitment. My background actually is a mixture of HR and engineering. I did my bachelor's degree in environmental engineering, and I was in Istanbul, and I worked with different, and after my bachelor's degree, I decided to continue my career in human resources. And then I worked with 3 different teams, over 2 years, 3 years experience. And then I decided to relocate to Ireland, and I did my master's here in human resources. And when I was working here, I came across with Arup, and it was actually a good combination. And I was able to understand the terminology in my company. And now I'm working here since 2019.
Sorry, the famous phrase of 2021, I'm muted. Thanks very much, Seyma. Thank you very much indeed for that. Very interesting. Thank you for being here today as well. And over to you, Michelle.
Thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Michelle O'Hagan and I'm the Graduate Recruitment Lead for PM Group. So I support the hiring for Ireland and Western Europe. So I manage all of our graduate recruitments, our whole intake, right from application review into the actual interview process. I guess just a bit about my background. My undergrad was in business studies, specialising in marketing within Dublin City University. And then from that, I continued to do a master's in Queen's University in Belfast in sustainability and corporate social responsibility. I guess just in terms of how your career can change, I worked heavily within the financial service sector prior to joining PM Group. So I would have been recruitment manager for Citibank Ireland. I worked with Deloitte, also managing their graduate campaigns, and Bank of America as well. So very much financial service, investment banking heavy. And then an opportunity came up within PM Group, and I wanted a new challenge, a new industry, and the engineering sector was something that was definitely still moving during COVID times. So I had the opportunity to join PM Group 6 months ago. So I've been brought in to manage their recruitment, and it's been a fantastic challenge and a fantastic change to my career. And I'd highly recommend people, if you have, or just, I guess you're only starting out in your career, but if opportunities arise down the line for a new change in career, definitely consider it, because it grows your knowledge in industries and it will definitely stand to you. And I'm really excited for the panel today, and hopefully we can help you along in terms of preparing you for your interviews down the line.
Thanks very much, Michelle. And again, great experience and hands-on experience, and congratulations on your role within 6 months and within the last year. So a bit of a challenge, but well able for it, no doubt. So thanks again to you as well, Michelle, for coming today and to share your experiences. A few questions came in, so please forgive me for looking down at my list of questions that have come through. But just in relation to your career so far, can you think of anything perhaps maybe that has helped your career so far, and any mistakes that you have learned from? I think that's a very good question that came in. Maybe back to John. John, your Wi-Fi must have gone there for a second. I hope you heard that question, or do you want a second or two?
No, that's fine. Technical issues. Yeah, these things happen in the virtual interview world, so you just have to work with them.
Exactly.
But yeah, it's, I suppose, one of the most important things that's happened to me in my career so far is take every opportunity as it comes. You never know. Sometimes a sideways move can be more important than an upwards move. So I think in terms of the opportunities I've had, I've moved teams when I didn't necessarily want to, but I just saw a gap and moved across. And some of the mistakes I've made, well, I've made lots of mistakes, but I don't really view them as mistakes. I view them as learning opportunities. The only mistake would be not to learn from it. So that's kind of what I always come back to. You know, you're gonna have human errors. You're gonna have things where it doesn't work out the way you planned, but you can always package that up and use it as a, you know, sometimes the negatives are more important than the positives. And it's to try and learn from that and package it and use it to go forward and make sure it doesn't happen again. That's the real mistake, if you make the same mistake twice.
Thanks very much, John. Very honest answer. Very, very much appreciate that. And looking out for opportunities and understanding everybody makes mistakes. I think we all do. I'm part of that club as well. But the piece of learning from that mistake. Thanks very much, John. Michelle, over to you.
Yeah, so I'd just reiterate everything John has said, just in terms of those opportunities moving across within a business area. Just even to give you an example, when I first started out in my career, I went into a sales focused role, and I thought, you know, I was very much a people person and the selling element, and I thought I was going to be great from a marketing perspective. And within my first week, I knew this was not for me, and I persevered. And a couple of months in, you know, 4 months later, I was so miserable, and I decided, okay, do I keep, you know, I was on a really good wage, and opportunities at the time wasn't really there for other companies, but I started headhunting, looking at positions on LinkedIn, and an opportunity come up with another company, and I could have persevered and stayed with the company, but I was so unhappy, and I took that opportunity to move into a sector, and that's how I got into recruitment and human resources, and I've never looked back since. So I think, you know, if you are unhappy with what you're doing, I would highly recommend reassessing yourself. You know, there's no harm in starting again or starting over, because again, you have to be happy with what you're doing. And as the saying goes, I think it's like there's no working day if you enjoy what you do. And I think that it just goes without saying. So that would be my recommendation on that.
Really good advice, Michelle. Thanks very much. And then Seyma.
I think for me it was, I definitely agree with John and Michelle. I think finding a job that you love to do, and because you will be retiring from that job and you'll be working on that for years and years, it's good to start something that it feels like your hobby and it's something that excites you. So I think that helped me a lot when in the beginning of my career, when I noticed that, and when I took my step towards that approach, I think that helped me a lot. But along the way, I think my appetite for learning and development and not accepting any information that's been given to me, I was doing my own research and developing my own authentic approach and solutions. I think that helped me a lot to find new ways, and the ways that other people didn't see or didn't persuade in their background. I think that's the most important thing for me, and it still helps me that doing my own research and finding my own answers. That's, I think, that pushed me to be outside my comfort zone, and now I'm here with you all. I believe this will help with all students as well.
Thanks, Seyma. And those being your authentic self And I suppose not taking everything as it's presented, and I suppose question and ask questions for everything. Thanks very much, Seyma. It's very, very good advice. So some of you have mentioned that, you've all mentioned, I suppose, that you have experience in relation to applications and I suppose that interview process as well. So we have a question here. So if your role involved interviewing candidates, what do you like to see at an internship interview or for a graduate role? What would you like the interviewee to bring on the day? So over to maybe Michelle this time.
Yeah, no problem. So I guess when we are interviewing candidates, we want candidates coming in that are fully prepared. And I guess before you get that interview, when it looks at CVs, making sure that your CV is in a really good template. And there's so many free templates out there, and specifically probably within the careers service team within UCD, I'm sure they have a library full of templates for CVs, and I highly recommend students utilize those, because the amount of times we get CVs that there's no real structure in place, as well as that making sure that the dates on your CV are correct, because just actually yesterday we had a student that we were interviewing and the dates were completely wrong for an undergraduate degree. It looked like he was studying for 6 years. And, you know, we had planned to question, did you take a gap or did you fail a year? But when it turned out, when we quizzed him, it was actually, no, I only did an undergraduate. It was straight through, but my dates are completely wrong. So just really being attention to detail is so important when it comes to your CV. We have spell check, make sure you're using your spell check. And one bit of advice as well is that get somebody in your family or your friends group to review your CV, proofread it, because you're looking at it, you know, day in, day out, and you're trying to update it, but you won't notice those mistakes. Whereas if you hand it to somebody else, they'll spot mistakes straight away, and just making sure that you're putting your best foot forward to ensure you get that interview in the first instance. Then when it comes to the actual interview itself, come fully prepared. Make sure you know what the company that you're interviewing with does. Make sure you know what the role you're interviewing for is about. The amount of candidates that come in and they can't tell us what PM Group is, or, you know, they give us the bare minimum. But if you want to be taken seriously in an interview, you need to do your research. There's so much material online. As well as that, majority of recruiters will send you hints and tips prior to the interview. We have an interview pack just to prepare our students coming in, so they have no excuse not to be fully prepared. As well as that, I would recommend students to ask questions during the interview process, especially at the end, because it's a two-way process. The interview, yes, we want to see what the student can offer us, but the student needs to assess, is this a company I want to work for? Am I going to be happy? And you really do get that impression from when you're interviewing. You see the type of people that are interviewing you. Are they prepared? Are they interested in hearing what I've got to offer? So I would definitely make sure students ask those questions around, what does your career look like so far? Why have you stayed with PM Group this long? Or what challenges have you faced, etc. And then one final thing is, during the interview, if you get nervous or if you lose your train of thought, we've all been there. I don't think there's anybody that hasn't interviewed where you've been asked a question and you're giving your answer and your train of thought is going completely off skew. And you're thinking in your head, where am I going with this? There is no problem in stopping, pausing, reflecting, and asking them to repeat the question, and taking a few minutes to actually get, okay, your train of thought back, and okay, I'm going to give this example, because again, it's just putting your best foot forward. And everybody has those blank moments, and there's no problem with that. And it's a lot better to stop and ask them to repeat it rather than continuing and your answer not making sense. So that would be my bit of advice when it comes to CV and interviews.
Great advice, Michelle. Thank you so much. Focusing on the application, make sure that no typos, clear typos, that it's easy to read, clear headings, and a good template, and quite concise. And also focusing on the interview and very much kind of having that knowledge of the company, know the inside out, that job description, the role that you're applying for as well. And then also, I think I had a blank moment there myself, but what I wanted to say was, firstly, to have those questions prepared in advance, I think is very good. Firstly, it demonstrates that you're listening to people at interview, but also it demonstrates that you've done some research. And as you say, it puts the shoe on the other foot, that you're asking the panel a question. And as we were mentioning, John, earlier, that if something does go wrong, it is okay. if your screen goes blank, if the window, if they start emptying the bins outside and you have to close the window, it's okay. And it's great to hear it from you, Michelle and John and Seyma, that if something goes wrong, it's okay. You just have to apologize and come back on screen and say apologies for that, or do you mind clarifying that question? Absolutely. So it's really great advice. Thanks very much, Michelle. And Seyma, any advice on, I suppose, the CV, the application, and also the interview itself?
So for the application process, I'd recommend students to not just stick with the cover letter and CV, but also if you think that there is something in your college work, it is different, or if that's a success to you, include it in your application forms, application documents. If you've done something really basic, but if you think that you did something different, and you really enjoyed it, and if it's relevant to the work that you're applying for, just include it in your document. If it's an AutoCAD drawing, if it's a Revit, doesn't matter. It'll give an insight about what you like to do, on who you are, to the managers. I agree with Michelle. I like hearing questions, especially the challenging ones, which gives me the insight about the candidate. It tells me that the candidate has high awareness and knows what he or she is applying for, and knows what he or she wants from a career. So it's very good to know that at the beginning, because it's very important for us to also see that if we'll be able to supply this to the candidate, and if the person who will be working with us will be happy working with us. Another thing is, I really like when students do a research before they come to the interview, and when they talk about our projects, or when they talk about the certain projects that is very interesting for them and they are favorite ones, or the market, the most up-to-date information that's happening around the market. For example, recently we interviewed with few people for climate change environmental team. And when there were students who were talking about the procedures and policies that's been changing, it showed us that they are into it before even starting the job. I think those are the most important ones for us, and I like to see them a lot more in the interview.
That's great, Seyma. I know a lot of students are often wonder, should I put my academic project, should I include that on my CV? And you know, it's great to hear that absolutely do include information like that, because that's gives the employer an opportunity to ask questions about that academic project. And that's where the student can bring that passion and show that they're enthusiastic as well. And then mentioning anything of their interests as well at interview as well. And as Michelle, and I'm sure John would echo as well, to do that research about the company and the role in advance, and being able to, and as you know, being up to date with information as well. So read all articles, look at the news, start doing research, not just about the role in the company, but very much start reading any new articles, and just obviously maybe on LinkedIn or something as well. So thanks very much, Seyma. John, I'd say you're probably going to echo everything that Michelle and Seyma had mentioned. Anything to add?
I was going to do that, and then I said, "I know what, I'm going to say something controversial instead," because it's a little bit more fun. So yeah, like a lot of people seem to just send the same generic CV and cover letter in to every single recruiter, and it might as well be sent straight to the bin, because we're not going to spend the time and energy on it. You want something that sets you out from the crowd. You want to show that you are passionate about that company, just like what Michelle and Seyma said. You know, you kind of want to show that you've done some research. So even in the cover letter, you just get something in there about why you're passionate about the role, why it is that you think you're a fit for the company, and some of the things that you'd be excited to work on in the company. It's especially important, I think, at grad and internship level, when most of the CVs are quite similar. Let's face it, you know, you've got similar qualifications, similar backgrounds, maybe slightly different in terms of like some of the things you might do extracurricularly, but it's largely the same kind of level. So you want to set yourself out from the crowd, and you need to find a way to do that. One of my colleagues, when I started to get involved in, I suppose, the recruitment side, said, you might as well just apply the staircase approach to it. And I was like, what's that? And he goes, fling them down the stairs and see what ones turn face up. And that's sometimes what people think about in terms of how do you separate grads and interns. So the really important thing to do, and I cannot stress it enough, is research, then put it into the cover letter and try and sell yourself. This is an opportunity to get your own across before you ever get to the interview phase. And the other thing is, make sure that your online identity is seamless and it's clean and it looks professional. go onto LinkedIn, set your profile out, be really professional. Anything that can be found on Facebook or Instagram or any of the other things that I'm not down with, make sure they're cleaned up too. You don't want to be showing any pictures of you out on a night out in a heap in Harcourt Street or somewhere. Make sure that that's all gone, because recruiters will research you as much as you will research them when it gets to the interview phase. So I just had to say something slightly different because it always would be the exact same. But I think I reckon that Michelle and Seyma would say the same.
Definitely, yeah.
Thanks. Absolutely, John. I think that's very interesting. And the digital footprint of a student came up as a discussion yesterday with our panel as well. And I think it's important for students to look at their digital footprint and Google themselves and see actually what actually does come up there. And even if today is the first day that they're going to put all of their social media on private and to, I suppose, clean up their digital media footprint, but also looking at that LinkedIn and having an opportunity to have a professional profile rather than an informal profile, I suppose. So LinkedIn is obviously not Instagram, it's not Twitter or Facebook. So having that professional, clean profile, and obviously look at your own profile for students to have a look and see what is on that profile and to clean it up from here. That's very good. And I think interesting, John, as well, in relation to looking at that USP, the unique selling point for a student, because I think a lot of students feel that they are very much similar to everybody else that's in their group as well. That is there a unique selling point that makes them stand out? So thanks very much for John. It's great advice. The question in relation to virtual interviews, or we're looking at virtual interviews today, and a question has come in relation to a student has been invited to attend a virtual interview. What advice would you give them? So I don't know would anybody like to answer that question before I
yeah, I don't mind answering, just to
Michelle.
give a few tips, I guess.
Thank you.
One thing I'll say about the virtual interviews, it's the exact same as if you're coming into a face-to-face interview, in the sense you still need to do all your prep, everything that we've discussed in terms of the actual getting prepared for the interview. Just because it's virtual doesn't mean that you can't be prepared. What I would say, have no distractions. So make sure that your mobiles are turned off. If you're being interviewed on Zoom, make sure that your Microsoft Teams is logged out. Make sure your emails are completely logged off, because you don't want something popping up on the side of your screen and it catching your attention. So just make sure that there's no distractions. Make sure your laptop is charged. The amount of times I've had students, sorry, I need to run and get my laptop, and then they can't find their laptop. That's happened so many times. And I think students are nervous about virtual interviews. So that's something that, completely forget about is my laptop charged, because they're going over their prep, and that's something that just goes out of the head. As well as that, as we've mentioned, making sure that they're tailoring their interviews and their CVs to the company. And one thing I actually didn't mention earlier is the amount of cover letters I've received from competitors of ours saying I would be delighted to work for X company and it's not our company. And going back to the students, it can be awkward. So just make sure that you are tailoring and removing. I know students are sending these out in bulk, so make sure that you are changing the company name when doing so as well. That's another thing. As I've mentioned, make sure that you are having eye contact. So even today we've got, in front of me, I can see 4 people on camera. So making sure that you're giving everybody the same amount of time when it comes to eye contact. And don't be afraid to use your hands if you're very expressed in it. It just shows that you're very engaged, and you're showing that you're interested. When the candidate or when the interviewer as well is asking the question, nod so that they can see that you're listening, that you're interested. Don't just be sitting there still. And one thing I will say at the start of the interview, make sure, like normally for interviewers, when we collect our candidates in reception, we have a bit of small chit chat on the way to the interview room. How was your journey in? Was traffic bad? And it just settles the nerves a wee bit. So I would say when you join, can you see me? Can you hear me okay? This virtual setting is a nightmare, or whatever you want to say, just so that you can break the ice a little and it will settle your nerves. And the interviewers are fully aware that for a lot of the students, it could be their first time interviewing virtually. So we take all of that on board as well. But that would be my main tips around that. Oh, sorry, one other thing, which I'm sure probably John or Seyma will touch on as well, is just we were mentioning the virtual backgrounds. So yes, everybody is at home. Some people have kids, family, running about the house. If if at all possible, if your background or your setting isn't as professional as you would like, you know, there's so many virtual backgrounds out there. Make sure you pick a professional one. As well as that, make sure your name on your login. We've had a few people join with really inappropriate names. When they join, they've been using their boyfriend's accounts or family members' accounts, and they didn't realize what their name would pop up on when they come into the screen. And some of them have been, it's been really awkward at times for the students. And when they notice what the name is, you know, it throws them completely off. We had one incident in particular. So just make sure that your name is clear as day, that yes, I'm interviewing with Michelle O'Hagan, and you can see the name. So that would be just a few things that we've noticed over the last few months interviewing.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Brilliant advice. Technology, name, correct name for you when you're virtual, but also correct name on your cover letter. And I'm sure that everybody will agree with that. And unfortunately, these mistakes happen, but just make sure they don't exactly, or else you won't get called for interview. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Michelle. Seyma.
Yep. I think I would only echo with what Michelle said. I think those are the things most commonly came across, issues or the problems or the incidents that we experience. One thing that I would recommend is that when you're attending a virtual interview, I know it'll sound very basic, but it's because that we came across this very often. You just need to attend the interview assuming that your video will be on. It'll be we won't be able to do this face to face, but it'll be virtual, it'll be video on, a camera on interview. So before the interview, just test your hardware equipment. If your microphone is working well, if your internet network is working well, and you're able to turn on your camera. And the other thing I'd recommend is, I think when you are face-to-face, maybe this would be a bit difficult to do, but when you're doing this when you're attending an interview from your home, this might be a bit easier. I'd recommend candidates, the students, to have a CV in front of them, because they'll be very stressed in the interview. And if there are few network issues, etc., it'll throw them off, as Michelle said. So having a pinpointed CV and putting the major points that you'd like to go through and you think it's a success and you should mention, then you wouldn't forget it, because it would be in front of you, you'd be able to check it and you wouldn't miss anything. I think this is a good side of doing a virtual interview, and I'd recommend students to take benefit of it, advantage of it.
Thank you very much, Seyma. I think that's a great idea to have that CV in front of you, or even stuck on the wall. No one will see it, or even some little sticky notes around your screen. Nobody sees that, and perhaps maybe you won't actually. We wouldn't advise a student reading off the CV or reading off little sticky notes, but it's just that safety net, just in case, and it's highlighting, as you mentioned, those key points that you want to mention at interview. That's great advice. Thank you very much, Seyma. John, again, I'm sure you've echoed everything. You will echo everything that Michelle and Seyma mentioned.
Yeah, so I'm going to go with the different. So like I have seen people coming in and, you know, they're using second screens or third screens to give themselves little prompts, which is fine. That's no problem. But as you just said, they often tend to read from it, and that looks really, really bad. So if you're going to have something behind the screen or behind, you know, on the table or somewhere, make sure that it's directly in your line of vision so that you see it. And that's crucial, so that you don't have to be like looking over here or looking over there, because it looks really pronounced if you've got any kind of slight deviation from your camera on your laptop. I suppose the other things is to have a fallback. You saw at the start of the call, my Wi-Fi fell over, so I moved to the hotspot on my 4G. It's just to have another network at hand if you can get something that's stable. You know, most people have a phone that they can easily create a hotspot on if their Wi-Fi isn't there. So it's just to have that, because you may not have another shot for a while. It might have to be postponed if you can't get back on. But there is no harm if it does fall over, you know, trying to get in contact with HR even by direct phone call and saying, look, I've fallen off, I can't get back on, can we postpone to another day? Do not try and push ahead without having the kind of the video aspect. I think without having a face-to-face, the virtual is really, really important. It's very, very hard to do a phone interview and get a good feel for someone. One of the things that I've seen some people do and I've quite liked is to try and make it a little bit interactive and a little bit more fun. Fun is probably the wrong word. I find it fun. But I just some people have kind of thrown me with like questions at the end where they've gone like, you know, show of hands, you know, who thinks that, you know, it's going to be possible to get, I don't know, whatever. 70% renewables on the power system by 2030, that kind of thing. And you're kind of going, yeah, me. And you're kind of going, oh, this guy's got me thinking, or this girl's got me thinking. And it's just a different way to stand out from the crowd. It's all about why you want to be, part of the team, that you're dynamic, you're able to, go with the technologies, go with whatever's in front of you, and that you can, you're a team player, but also you're able to be interactive and work with people. That's what you're trying to assess. Really hard to do in virtual environment. It's so difficult to go, how is this person going to be a fit in my team? How am I going to work with them? Because you're just seeing a snapshot. In person, you get that rapport because you're collecting them in the lobby, you're walking through the building, you're having a little chat about how did you get here today, the bus or the car, the weather's awful, blah. But it is a chance to build up rapport. So hard to do in the virtual world. So try and use any little trick you can to get that rapport across, because you only have a short time with the employers, and then it's on to the next. So you want to stay in their mind for the rest of the day is the important thing.
Thanks very much, John. Absolutely. I know the employer finds it difficult to read a student virtually and to read their personality and the personality fit for the company. But it's also very difficult for the student, I suppose, to bring that personality as well. And I think it's important also what Michelle had mentioned about smiling and nodding to the camera and trying to show that you're enthusiastic, that you have that passion as well. Thank you very much, everybody. A question came in relation to negotiating salary. I'm just wondering if any of you have any advice in relation to this. It's not really just a virtual piece, but can it be discussed at interview, and would you recommend it being brought up at interview? John is visually there shaking head. So John, over to you. What do you think?
I'm shaking my head. Well, I suppose it really depends on the company. Like within Eirgrid, certainly I have no say in what anyone's going to get to have as their salary, and that's a negotiation that happens with HR. The two ladies will have more, I suppose, a background in that space. But as a hiring manager, I don't really get an opportunity. So if somebody brings it up at interview, I'm kind of going, oh, please don't go there. I don't want to. It makes me uncomfortable because I can't discuss it at interview. Like, first off, you don't know if the person's going to be successful, and you end up in what if scenarios. It just doesn't work. I think keep it more, towards you and what you can do and how you're going to develop. You are a grad or a student coming in, so you're going to need assistance, you're going to need help. Keep it on things like are there any opportunities for me to upskill? Are there any training courses going to be provided? They're almost like salary because they're investing in you, they're spending money on you. And if they're saying, yeah, we're going to provide you with this, this, and this, and we're going to set you up to become a chartered engineer, we're going to do all these great things with you, then the salary will be some way competitive, and you can have that discussion when you are in the negotiation phase. But that's just my tuppence worth. I'll hand over to one of the others on the panel because they're probably more familiar.
Thank you, John. Michelle.
Yeah, so I guess from my perspective is you're 100% entitled to obviously ask the question, but as John said, I would recommend you not to ask the question. The reason being is that I'm sure Seyma and John will agree, there's no engineering firm out there that is not competitive when it comes to salary. We all are working off market rates. We're not going to be paying below the market rate. And again, it's a very competitive industry. So the companies are there or thereabouts in terms of the salaries. Students, as well as that, when it does come to negotiation, it is a set standard. And I think at graduate level I've worked in various companies managing graduate recruitment over the last number of years. Every company has set salary standards. It's not a case of a graduate comes in and negotiates up a 5K increase in comparison to someone coming in with the exact same experience, exact same degree. And as well as that, students coming from direct from university, they don't have that industry knowledge that is going to set you on a massive salary at the beginning. You have to work your way up. But I will say salaries are definitely competitive, especially within the engineering industry. There's no salary that I don't think students would turn their nose up at. And again, for students, as John rightly mentioned, it's the extra benefits that you get as well. Will companies support your chartership? Is there training involved? Like within our graduate program, we have extensive training programs in place. And what does the support network look like? Think of the actual career itself rather than the money. Are you going to be happy in the company? They're the type of questions that you need to be asking rather than can I get a 10K increase, or what is the salary? And like that, for the hiring managers that don't have visibility of that, it can be really awkward. So we would always just end the call with saying it's a competitive salary and we only disclose it when we're going to offer. And that would be PM Group's stance anyways.
Thanks, Michelle. And I suppose as yourself and John are mentioning, it's relation to looking at that full package and understanding the package, and also understanding there might be promotional opportunities, I suppose, in the future, and doing that research before. Seyma, what do you think? What's your opinion on that?
I think negotiation is a step further. If it's asked to you about your salary expectation, if you are already working at a job, and if you know that you won't be working below a certain number, I don't see a damage for you to explain what would be your expected salary expectation or current salary, and you wouldn't go below. Or if you got an offer and if you think that's just more relevant, it's just like more satisfactory for you, I don't see a reason why you wouldn't explain it. But negotiation is further down the line. I think when you get an offer, HR already called, for us, at least for Arup, HR calls you the next day and at least goes through your offer and talks about everything, all the details of graduate program, trainings, and also your salary. And if you have a profit share, we discuss about the details of that too. So that's your window to do the negotiation if you want to. And for grads, as my colleague said here, for grads, that's an inexperienced candidate. Most of the companies have their grading system in place. So every grade has its own salary rate, and mostly grads start with the same rate. So most companies will not extend that amount. That's why, yes, there might not be a point discussing or doing the negotiation, but it would be good for you to know that there is a fair system in the company too. As John and Michelle said, yes, I think all the candidates should talk about if there's a membership fee with the different institutes, professional institutes, or if there is a travel to work scheme or other benefits that's included in the offer that increases your offer's actually cost and number. So it's also your priority if you want to do a negotiation about other benefits. And if you don't know if it's offered to you in the company, there's no harm asking that, but it's just you just need to be prepared to get the answer no. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Seyma. I think we're all in agreement. Thank you all very much for that. So I suppose another question in relation to, again, keeping it in relation to the virtual world, do you hold assessment days for graduate recruitment? Perhaps maybe even in a face-to-face, I suppose pre-COVID. Have you held assessment days, and what would that assessment day look like? And have you held assessment days virtually for recent graduates? Who would like to, Michelle, would you like to maybe comment a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, for PM Group, we don't hold assessment centres, and we haven't done so with the virtual setting, just from a logistics point of view. But I have worked in companies previously that was very much heavy assessment centre focused. So in terms of some of the scenarios that you can see yourself in, would be where you would go through a range of different interviews, from your competency-based interview, then move into a technical-based interview, and then move into a group discussion and a presentation as well. So you'd be given a scenario and you would be working with a group of probably 3 to 4 or maybe 5 people, depending on the number of intake on the day of the assessment centre. And you have to work together. You're given maybe 20 to 30 minutes to work on a project. But one thing, I guess this is a giveaway to any students that will be doing assessment centres, usually when you're given that scenario, there will be an interruption, and that will just throw a curveball in the process. So it's something that you're not going to be, you're going to be so focused on getting all the bullet points that you're asked to do, and then someone will come knocking on the door and say, okay, the project has now changed, the deadline has moved, or the budget has decreased, or whatever it may be, depending on the scenario. And then at the end, you have to present back your findings to the panel of interviewers. In terms of, you can also, from assessment centres as well, sometimes there can be psychometric testing, online reasoning. It really varies depending on the company. I know within the financial services, it's very much heavily focused around online testing and all of that kind of thing. But for students preparing, especially when it comes to that group element, and I know within the engineering firms specifically, teamwork is so important, and being able to interact with multidisciplinaries and cross-functional departments, just due to the nature of the industry. You know, when you're working on projects, you can't work without the mechanical engineers or the piping engineers or whatever it may be. You need everybody on board for the one project. So being able to influence, be able to ensure that everybody understands what's at hand, everybody's comfortable with the task that's been assigned to them, and assessing whose skills are probably mostly suited to what. So if it is a case you're in a group scenario and you have to split the group, so some people are going to be presenting and some people are going to be maybe doing up the presentation, whatever it may be, asking who's comfortable with public speaking, asking who's comfortable with researching, that kind of thing, and also putting yourself forward, because again, this is your opportunity to shine, and you are up against everybody else, but not in the sense of making sure you're the only one talking and you're taking control, more so about making sure everybody is included, everybody has a fair chance to talk, you know, suggesting I'll be the timekeeper, things like that, and being vocal in the conversation and being engaging as well is very important. But that's the type of aspects from an assessment centre style. I actually have some hints and tips that I can share afterwards if you want to share out to the students that we have that might be useful as well.
Thanks very much, Michelle. Absolutely, that would be very welcome. Students can email me directly, leona.barrett@ucd.ie, and I can send them on. Thank you very much, Michelle. And I think it's very important in relation to an assessment centre. I know some students have said to me in the past, so if I don't say anything, I can't actually get anything wrong. But that's not correct, because you need to be able to share your voice and air your voice and speak up, as you mentioned. So I think that's very important. You can't, an employer cannot gauge you within one of those scenarios if you say nothing. So it will not help. So thanks very much, Michelle. That's really helpful. John, I think I could see you nodding and agreeing with many things there in relation to psychometric tests and preparing in advance. And do you work with assessment centres on the day, and have you done so virtually?
So we haven't done any virtually. We used to up until a year and a half, 2 years ago now. But yeah, we had used assessment centres only for a graduate intake. So any grads coming in with us would have had that opportunity. And it's really to see how people collaborate and work. It's teamwork, really. It's so hard to see that from looking at a CV, you know. So it's about how you work together. So saying nothing will probably mean you'll not be successful. Saying too much can also mean not being successful. So it's getting the sweet spot. It's really about, you know, coordinating, you know, working with others, making sure that, you know, the project is at least on time. It's okay if you fail at what the task at hand is. It's just how you go about it. It's the process, and making sure that you stick to that. But the assessment centers, I don't know if many companies are doing them at the moment in that virtual environment. They're so hard to deliver virtually. But psychometric testing, as Michelle mentioned, that is, I think, used by many companies at the moment. At least some of the grads I've been speaking to that have arrived said they had to do it for almost every interview that they went in for, and possibly had a phone screening as well with like just a member of HR to get a feel for what the role was about, what their expectations were, and some of those other early things before we focus on competence-based interviews at Eirgrid and Sony, our sister company in Northern Ireland. So we use those, and the technical kind of side of things doesn't really feature, and apart from the assessment centers, which we aren't doing with the virtual world. So yeah, it's just a pivot because of COVID, I reckon.
Thanks very much, John. Yes, some companies have, I suppose, stopped. There have been one or two that actually are still offering virtual assessment days. Seyma, thank you, John. Seyma, over to you. Any advice in relation to assessment days?
I agree with Michelle and John, and I think, so at Arup we don't have assessment centres in Ireland, but in UK we do. It's a completely different team, and it continues virtually, and they have psychometric tests and everything. But for Ireland, we don't use it. We have formal, friendly interviews. It's competency-based, but it's not stress-based interview at all. It's just for us to get to know you better and for you to get to know us better. And for your earlier comment on, but I've worked in my previous companies, I've worked with assessment centers. I'm actually a certified assessor by Behavioral Science Institute for those assessments. If you don't present any of your characteristics or skills or the way you approach the problems, then the companies would think either you have no opinion, and I'm not sure if it's better to have a wrong opinion. I think it's just have an opinion is the best way. And if you agree with everything that's been said to you, it means that you will not contribute to work. You'll just say yes to everything that comes on your way, but you won't be a game changer. So I know it's very difficult, but I think it will be important. It's important to show how you would solve anything or how you would deal with the situation in a regular day if this wasn't an assessment. I think that'll present you the best way, and just instead of marking the right points, I'd recommend students to focus on that. And for the one tip about the group works, it helps to be the one who speaks the first. And when you start a conversation, it means that you have an initiative skill and you are keen to overcome this and come to the solution, or you are a skill that you want to lead a group. These are all good, I think, things to show in an assessment center.
Thanks very much, Seyma. And it's coming back about what you mentioned, that bringing your authentic self and I suppose asking questions. And I think it's very good advice in relation to treating it as a real life scenario, because that's what employers are using it for. And also, I really like that advice of speaking first. So you get an opportunity to say something, because later on, perhaps maybe you've nothing to say. So maybe speaking first can do that. I also particularly like, John, what you mentioned, that you don't necessarily have to get the case study completed or done or correct. As you were, Michelle and Seyma and John, you were all saying, just bring your skills and bring those skills. And what are they? Your teamwork, communication, your listening skills, your presentation skills. I think that's incredibly helpful. Thank you very much. I'm just keeping a look on time here as well. We're doing very well. Now, some questions are coming in as well through the Q&A. So I'm just reading this. So again, I'm looking off the screen. So as students can see, it can be a little bit distracting when somebody's not looking into the the camera. So we have a question from Khan. Similar to John's example of an interviewee being interactive, other experiences, other skills, are there things an interviewee has said, etc., that have differentiated them from other applicants and impressed the interviewer? So would anybody like to answer that question? So is there anything, I think we were talking about it, John, in relation to that USP again, that unique selling point. You had mentioned in relation when somebody had asked the question to the panel had to raise their hand. Can anyone think of anything else, I suppose? Are there any experiences, skills, or things an interviewee has said that have differentiated them from applicants and have impressed the interviewer? If anybody just wants to raise your hand, if anybody has a... Michelle?
Yeah, I just have one example, because when John mentioned just about the candidate in the interview, and it jogged my memory back. One thing this year, I guess, students need to be aware of, and companies are fully aware of, that students haven't been able to get internships this year. And with that, there is a lot more emphasis now put on the interview when it comes to your projects, which Seyma mentioned, to make sure that you include on your CV. Is that project piece, your final year project piece, your third year project piece? And we had one candidate that had done a very detailed project, and he was discussing it in detail, and we were so interested, and he had suggested, he goes, if you don't mind, I have actually all of my visuals of the project, because it was a really interesting project he had built. It was almost like built a car. It was within mechanical engineering, and he was like, I've got all my visuals. If you don't mind, I can share my screen and show you. And we were like, yeah, of course. So he shared his screen, but he had everything planned out in detail, you know, obviously with the opportunity, if we had said, yes, he's fully prepared, and it looked so professional. So from our perspective, we were delighted to see that. So there's no harm in suggesting, you know, that, because again, the hiring managers want to see what your skills are like. And if you can show a really good project that you've completed by yourself, that was definitely something that stood out to me in an interview situation. So maybe if students had something like that, especially within the courses that are attending today, I think majority of people are from the engineering and science background, so they probably will have really interesting projects to show.
Thanks, Michelle. That's great advice. And it's one thing, again, in the virtual way that we can share screens and ask permission, I suppose, to do it in advance. Thanks very much. Anyone else's? John? Or Seyma, sorry, Seyma.
No problem. I think this will take me back to my answer, what I want to say in the interview. I think the challenging questions, again, one question that one of the managers got, and he was impressed with the question. One of the candidates asked about the career development, and then asked about what would be the major tasks within the team if she would start with us, or what was going to offer her if she was the successful candidate, about the career development within the 3 years down the line. So it's just those challenging questions. Actually, it just shows you are thinking outside the box. You're not only using the questions that you see in the internet and you see in the interview tips and hints. You really put your mind into it. It means that you really care about the role. I think those are the ones that put students in may have them to be outstanding ones. I think I'd echo that again.
Thanks, Seyma. And virtually, it's a great opportunity to have a pen and paper when you're at a virtual interview, that if something comes up, perhaps even throughout the interview, that is very relevant, that you could perhaps maybe ask at the end. So rather than those typical interview questions that you could ask, have something that's very specific. Thanks very much. Lovely. John, do you have anything come to mind?
There was actually one this morning. I was interviewing this morning and had a very strange scenario where a person actually reached out to me on LinkedIn maybe 2 weeks ago. I was talking to him on LinkedIn and he was asking questions about what I did, what my role was. I didn't think twice about it. And this morning I was sitting in front of him and going, I know you from somewhere. So it was a real case, but he'd built that rapport. So I knew, like, it was a real relaxed kind of start to the interview, and he scored very well as a result, because I was able to get straight into the questions that I wanted to ask. I kind of knew where his mindset was in advance. It's possibly cheating, so I won't recommend you reach out to everyone, but if you do get to this phase where you get to see the name, see what they're about, and try and see if you can make some sort of contact. You don't have to be, inundating them with, I'm going to be interviewing with you or anything, but just, I'm interested in this area, like, could you just tell me a little bit about yourself? Some people will, some people won't, but it can be useful. The other really important thing is he recognized that I was the only technical manager at that interview this morning, and he made all the complex jargon really, really simple and straightforward. There's always going to be someone there from HR, and they will not know, your acronyms or your, what mathematical formulas you've solved or anything like that. So what really impressed me was he took a really complex equation and just put it into plain English, simple, what they call NALA or whatever it is, very, very straightforward that anyone can understand, whether they're technical or not. He didn't care. He just made it really easy and accessible, and it really struck the HR representative on that panel as well, that, like, I understood that interview. Everything that was said, even though it sounded quite complex, I actually understood it, and they felt that they were an engineer too at the end of it. So that's really good. It strikes up rapport and helps people get on board. So yeah, if you can find some way to strike, there's going to be 2 or 3 people in an interview, most likely 3, HR person, the hiring manager, and somebody who will be kind of a bar raiser, as we call them in Eirgrid, where they're going to go, is it the person that fit for the organization? Because, we want people to come in and stay with us. So they may start in the role that they're in on the grad program or wherever, but they'll probably move about in their career. And it's, does that person work in other parts of the business? So you might get someone from legal or HR or finance or from wherever, as well as an engineering manager. So just to be aware of that, not everyone is going to know your background. And even in engineering, there are so many different fields. You might be better off to just explain things from first principles up.
Thanks very much, John. I think that's really good advice. And we were discussing earlier as well at our workshop to research who's actually going to be at that panel and think about questions that they might ask at that panel. Perhaps, as you mentioned, there could be somebody there from HR, there could be somebody there from technical, there could be somebody very senior there, or somebody looking to see, is this individual suitable for the graduate program, but also as part of the company for the future?